I never thought one simple word no could blow up my entire family. I'm 42. I've lived long enough to know that families can be messy, but nothing prepared me for the moment my own brother asked me to lie under oath, and everyone acted like I was the monster for refusing. If you've ever been caught in a situation where doing the right thing somehow makes you the villain, then buckle up, because you're about to hear the story of how I went from the responsible older brother to the traitor who abandoned his blood. At least that's what my family keeps calling me now. And the worst part? The thing he wanted me to lie about wasn't even life-changing. It was small, ridiculous. But lying about it would have destroyed my reputation, my job, and honestly, the way I see myself. And yet somehow, I became the heartless one. When this whole thing started, I thought it would be one of those family misunderstandings, the kind you laugh about 5 years later. Instead, it turned into a slow burn explosion that took out everything in its path. So let me rewind. My brother, Mark, is 39. And if I had to describe him in one sentence, it would be, he's the guy who always gets himself into problems that magically become your problems. You know the type. The one who can't return a borrowed lawnmower without breaking it, and somehow you're the one who ends up apologizing to the neighbor, the one who borrows money and then looks offended when you ask for it back. But the thing about Mark is, he's charming, wildly charming. He could sell sand in a desert and make you feel like you got a discount. My whole family has always been weirdly hypnotized by that charm. Me, I've always been the opposite, cautious, stiff, maybe a little boring. I don't get into trouble. I don't cause waves. I do my job, pay my bills, and try to be a decent person. And for most of my life, that was enough. But then came the court case. Now, let me be very clear. This wasn't some dramatic criminal trial. Nobody was going to prison. There were no flashing blue lights or scandalous headlines waiting to happen. This was a small civil matter, the kind people usually roll their eyes at, the kind that barely makes it past the courthouse door. But to Mark, it was everything. He told me he had gotten into a dispute with his landlord and that the landlord was trying to screw him over. I didn't ask for details right away because whenever Mark feels wronged, the story tends to come out wrapped in dramatic tissue paper. A simple disagreement suddenly becomes a full Shakespeare act, complete with betrayal and tragic monologues. But this time, he sounded desperate, and that worried me. So when he asked if he could come over to talk about something important, I said yes. I wish I hadn't. He showed up that night with this frantic energy, pacing around my living room, cracking his knuckles, chewing gum like it owed him money. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over. "You're the only one who can help me." That should have been my first warning. Eventually, he sat down and told me everything. And by everything, I mean everything but the truth. At first, he framed it like he was an innocent victim. According to him, his landlord had accused him of causing property damage that he swore he definitely didn't do. He told me the landlord was trying to charge him for repairs that were already needed when he moved in. His voice cracked. He wiped his eyes. He played it like a sad underdog who just needed someone to believe him. Then he dropped the real reason he came. "I told my lawyer that you were with me that night," he said. I blinked at him. "What night?" "The night the damage supposedly happened," he said, waving his hands like the details were trivial. "I told him you were over, so obviously you could confirm that I didn't do anything." I stared at him for a solid 10 seconds, waiting for the part where he'd break character and say he was joking. He didn't. "Mark," I said slowly, "I wasn't with you that night." He knew that. I knew that. Even my dog knew that. And yet, he shrugged, like this was a minor inconvenience. "Yeah, but nobody else needs to know that. Look, it's not a big deal. Just tell the court you were with me. That's it. One sentence. One sentence. One sentence that would legally make me a liar. One sentence that could tank my career because I work in a field where honesty isn't optional. One sentence that could follow me for the rest of my life." I couldn't believe he even asked. "Mark, no," I said. "I'm not lying in court." He went quiet. Too quiet. His whole face shifted like some mask he'd been wearing finally cracked. He looked at me like I had betrayed him. "You're really not going to help your own brother?" he asked. "Not like that," I said. "Not by lying." And then he said something I'll never forget, because it felt like being stabbed with a sentence. "Wow, I always knew you cared more about rules than family." That one hit hard. because it wasn't true. At least, I didn't think it was. But he knew exactly where to hit. Mark has always known how to twist guilt like a knife. He stormed out after that, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on my wall. I figured he just needed time to cool off. Nope. Instead, he escalated. He told my parents. He told our relatives. He told anyone who would listen that I refused to support him and that I was turning my back on family when it mattered most. He spun it like he was being crushed by injustice, and I was too selfish to lend a hand. And they believed him. I woke up to messages from my mom, long paragraphs filled with things like, "He's your brother, family comes first, and I didn't raise you to be this cold." My dad didn't bother writing paragraphs. He sent one message: "Help your brother, no question mark. No conversation, just an order." I can't lie, that one stung too. The next day, I got a call from my aunt, who opened with, "We're all really disappointed in you." Not hello, not how are you, just straight to disappointment. The pressure was insane. It felt like I was being dragged into some bizarre morality play where Mark was the tragic hero, my family was the emotional chorus, and I was cast as the villain who wouldn't support one of our own. But the worst part, none of them asked what actually happened. Not a single person said, "Wait, what did he ask you to do?" They just assumed I must have been wrong. Why? Because Mark is the golden child, the charismatic one, the baby of the family, the one who could accidentally set the kitchen on fire and still get dessert afterward because he meant well. And me? I'm the reliable one, the stable one, the rule follower, which apparently makes me the designated bad guy whenever the golden child screws up. The guilt campaign continued for days. Every conversation became an ambush. Every text message felt like a shove. My family didn't want the truth. They wanted loyalty, blind loyalty, the kind where you don't think, you just obey. And I could have handled all of that if not for what happened next. Because a few days later, I got a call from someone I never expected to hear from, Mark's lawyer. And that conversation made me realize how deep my brother had dug this hole and how far he expected me to sink with him. When Mark's lawyer called me, I honestly thought it was some kind of prank. I mean, what lawyer just calls the family member of their client out of the blue? Shouldn't that break like 20 different rules? But I guess Mark had already dragged my name so deeply into his case that his lawyer had no choice but to reach out. The call came in while I was making coffee. I didn't recognize the number. If I had, trust me, I would have let it go straight to voicemail. But I answered. And the moment the guy introduced himself, my stomach dropped through the floor. "Hello? Is this Mark's brother?" Right away, alarm bells. "Yes," I said, already bracing myself for nonsense. "This is Daniel Reed. I'm Mark's attorney. He informed me you witnessed the events relevant to the case and can confirm his whereabouts the night in question. It is before their AT5. I swear my eye twitched. I took a breath not because I was calm, but because I genuinely needed oxygen to avoid passing out from the sheer stupidity of the situation. I steadied myself against the counter. "Yeah, that's not true," I said. "I wasn't with him that night." Long pause. Long pause. Then the attorney sighed. And it wasn't the sigh of someone annoyed, it was the sigh of someone who saw a landslide coming and realized he was standing right at the bottom of it. "I suspected as much," he said, and that one sentence told me everything I needed to know about how this case was going. I asked him what exactly Mark had said, not because I wanted drama, but because I needed to know how badly Mark had twisted my existence into his fantasy defense. Daniel, the lawyer, explained it all. Mark told him that I was at his apartment the entire evening, that we'd watched a basketball game together, that I had personally seen the apartment in perfect condition before he left for work the next day. He told the lawyer I was his strongest witness. So not only did he lie, he built a whole fictional evening around me. I felt sick. "Look," Daniel said, lowering his voice like he was telling me a secret, "I'm not supposed to advise you directly, but you need to know that if you testify to anything other than the truth, you could face consequences, including perjury." "I know," I said, "and I'm not lying." "I didn't think you would," he said. "Frankly, I was hoping you wouldn't." That caught me off guard. "Why?" I asked. Another sigh. "Because your brother's story doesn't hold up without a witness. And if he was willing to fabricate one, then that tells me something." I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream. Maybe all three. Is the case really that serious? I asked. Mark made it sound like it was nothing. Daniel hesitated, which is never a good sign. Well, the dispute itself is minor, but the landlord has documentation, photographs, and timestamps. It doesn't look good for your brother. And if he's found to have acted recklessly, the charges could escalate financially. Financially, that explained everything. Mark isn't afraid of court. He's afraid of debt. He's been drowning in it for years. Credit cards, unpaid fees, old fines he pretends not to remember. Our parents have bailed him out so many times that I've lost count. And every time, he promises it's the last time. Spoiler, it never is. After the call ended, I sat there in silence, staring at my coffee like it betrayed me. My brother had lied to everyone, his lawyer, my parents, our relatives, and he was asking me to lie too. Not for justice, not for survival, but because he didn't want to face the consequences of his own choices. Later that evening, I got a message from my mom saying they were hosting a casual family dinner that weekend. Translation, an intervention where the target is me. I almost didn't go, but skipping it would have added more fuel to their blame fire, so I forced myself to show up. When I walked in, the atmosphere was off. You know when you enter a room and every conversation stops just a little too quickly? Like people had been talking about you 5 seconds before you arrived? That was the vibe. The air itself felt like thick judgment soup. My mom hugged me with that stiff, I'm disappointed but pretending not to show it energy. My dad barely looked at me. My aunt gave me the kind of forced smile people give before they sink a knife between your ribs, metaphorically. Hopefully. Mark wasn't there yet. Typical, we sat down for dinner and everyone acted normal, fake normal, until my father cleared his throat. A sure sign the lecture was coming. My dad is not a man of many words, so when he speaks, it's usually meaningful or terrifying. Sometimes both. Son, he said, putting down his fork, we need to talk about your brother. Of course. I nodded, waiting. He's going through a difficult time. My mom chimed in. He needs support. My aunt added, family is supposed to lift each other up, not tear each other down. I took a slow breath. I am supporting him, but I'm not going to lie in court. Silence. Then my aunt actually scoffed like I just said I was allergic to kindness. My mom leaned forward, giving me that soft, emotional guilt face she's perfected over decades. Honey, sometimes we have to bend for the people we love. Bend, I repeated. You mean break. My dad stared at me like he was trying to burn a hole through my skull. All he's asking for is one statement. One false statement, I said, under oath. My mom waved her hand dismissively. No one will know. I almost laughed. I will know. But before I could continue, Mark finally arrived. He walked into the dining room like a martyr, arriving at his own execution. Shoulders slumped, eyes sad, lips pursed. If he had carried a violin, he could have played background music for his own entrance. Everyone looked at him with immediate sympathy. He sat down, didn't greet me, didn't greet anyone, just sighed dramatically, like oxygen offended him. Then he said, so, have you thought about it? I stared at him. Thought about lying in court? Yes. My answer is still no. And that's when the entire room turned on me. I can't remember who started yelling first. It was like a choir of disappointment, all hitting different emotional notes. Just help him. Why are you being so stubborn? He's your brother. You're making this harder than it needs to be. And Mark just sat there, staring at me with this expression that screamed, see what you're doing to me? He didn't defend me. He didn't take responsibility. He just let them tear into me like I was the problem. At one point, my mom even said, if he goes bankrupt, that will be on your conscience. I snapped. Bankrupt? So that's what this was really about. It suddenly made sense why everyone was so desperate. My parents were terrified of having to bail him out again. My relatives were terrified of Mark asking them for money. Everyone wanted me to lie because it was easier for them than dealing with the fallout. I looked at all of them and said, I am not committing perjury, so you all can avoid a financial inconvenience. The room froze. My dad clenched his jaw. My mom whispered, I can't believe you said that. And Mark, oh Mark, he finally spoke. You know what? He said, voice rising. I always knew you thought you were better than me. You and your stupid morals. You'd rather watch me get ruined than lift a finger. Lift a finger? A finger he wanted me to place on a Bible while lying through my teeth. Then he delivered the final blow. You're dead to me. He said it like it cost him nothing, like cutting me off was a casual Tuesday activity. My stomach dropped. I looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend me. Nobody did. Not one person. That's when I realized something painful. My family didn't want the truth. They wanted convenience. And I wasn't convenient. I left dinner early. No hugs, no drive safe, just silent disapproval and my brother glaring at me like I had personally destroyed his life. But the real storm came the next morning because I woke up to a voicemail from someone unexpected. Someone who changed the entire trajectory of this situation. The voicemail was from Mark's landlord. I listened to it with a sinking feeling. My hands were shaking slightly, not from anger, but from that bone-deep tension you feel when you know the storm is bigger than you imagined. Hello, this is Mr. Caldwell. I'm calling about the incident at your brother's apartment. We'd like to clarify a few points, and if you could confirm some details, that would be appreciated. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. Me? Confirm details? I wasn't even involved in the incident. And yet, Mark had somehow dragged my name into the mix so thoroughly that the landlord now thought I might be a witness and maybe, in his mind, a complicit one if I didn't cooperate. At that moment, I realized the situation was no longer just about family pressure. It was legal. It was public record. It could affect my job, my credibility, my reputation, and all of it because my brother wanted a convenient lie. I knew I had to make a choice, but not the kind of flip a coin and see what happens choice. This was about standing my ground when everyone, including the people I trusted most, was against me. I called Mr. Caldwell back. Hello, this is Jason, I said. My voice was steady, trying to convey calm even though my stomach was twisting. I got your message. Thank you for returning my call, he said, friendly but firm. I just wanted to confirm some details about the evening your brother alleges he was at home. Are you able to speak about that? Yes, I said, I can. And I want to be completely clear. I was not with my brother that night. He paused, then said, all right, thank you for clarifying that. That helps a lot. I hung up and felt lighter and terrified. I knew the family fallout was about to hit like a freight train. I called my sister-in-law, next Mark's wife. I needed to make sure she knew I wasn't against her or against her husband personally. I just wanted the truth to come out. She answered cheerfully, completely unaware of the emotional minefield she was stepping into. Hey Jason, she said, have you talked to Mark yet about what happened at dinner? Yes, I said cautiously. I told him I can't lie in court. There was a pause. Then, oh, I see. Her voice softened. I guess everyone is a bit upset, but we appreciate your honesty. If you want knew that whiz. Her tone was gentle, not judgmental, not dramatic, just understanding. For a brief moment, I felt like I had an ally, a single human being who saw the nuance in what was happening. And it reminded me that somewhere between loyalty and honesty, there's a line that, if crossed, changes who you are forever. But of course, Mark didn't see it that way. By the next morning, my phone was flooded. Calls, texts, messages on social media, all from relatives, friends, and even coworkers who had somehow heard through the family grapevine. They all wanted to know, why wasn't I supporting my brother? Why was I making things difficult? How could I let my own flesh and blood go through this without helping? And I realized something. The narrative had already been written. Mark had positioned me as the villain, and everyone else had eagerly accepted the script. It didn't matter what I said. Facts didn't matter. The story I had lived through wasn't the story they wanted to hear. I tried explaining again and again. I can't lie. I wasn't there. It would be illegal. I could lose everything. Some listened, most didn't. Some just said, you're overreacting. A few said, you're heartless. Heartless, me, the brother who spent decades trying to keep the peace, making sure bills were paid, holidays were pleasant, who had spent his life quietly trying to do right by people. And now, somehow, I was the bad guy. It was surreal. I started thinking back to smaller moments in my life, little instances where I always tried to be fair, to be honest, to be responsible, and realized that none of that mattered now. None of it. All that mattered was the story Mark wanted to tell. And if you were in that story, your role was assigned at birth. Hero, villain, victim. I felt trapped in a family play I never auditioned for. Then came the day of the court hearing. I woke up early, heart hammering. My stomach churned. Every instinct told me to just avoid it, stay home, pretend nothing was happening. But I knew that wasn't an option. If I didn't show up, I'd make Mark's lies seem more credible. If I did show up, I'd face the entire family, the courtroom, the moral weight of my decision. I dressed carefully, nothing flashy, nothing too casual, neutral, safe. I wanted to look like someone who simply existed in the world, not someone preparing to battle both a brother and the universe. The drive to court felt like walking through a tunnel with no end. My thoughts spun in loops. What if my family's judgment follows me there? What if I'm branded a liar just for refusing? What if Mark finds a way to twist the truth anyway? I parked, walked inside, and immediately felt the eyes. Not just the judge, the other attendees, the lawyers, but my own family. Sitting in the back row, staring, waiting, judging, waiting for me to crumble. Mark looked over at me with that same expression he's mastered so well. Part wounded victim, part martyr, part challenge. And the worst part was that everyone else in the courtroom seemed to be silently agreeing with him. My heart sank. When it was my turn to testify, I stood. I walked to the witness stand, trying to focus on my breathing, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I looked at the judge, the lawyers, and finally at my brother. I said clearly, without hesitation, I was not with my brother that night. I cannot confirm any part of his story because it is not true. I am here to testify honestly. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's jaw dropped slightly, like he hadn't expected someone to actually defy him. The courtroom seemed to lean in. Even the lawyer representing the landlord gave me a nod. Small, professional, but real. Mark's face twisted, first in shock, then in anger, then in that familiar look of betrayal he reserves for anyone who refuses to enable him. After I stepped down, the judge moved on quickly, as courtrooms do. But the damage, the emotional aftermath was still waiting outside, and it hit hard. The ride home was tense. My parents barely spoke. My aunt muttered something about how hard it must be for me to be so stubborn. And Mark, he didn't speak at all. He just stared out the window, like the entire world had conspired against him personally, except it hadn't. I had only refused to lie. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. I reflected on everything that had happened. The lies, the pressure, the family judgment, the guilt, the betrayal. And I realized something profound. Sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing in the world, not because it's dangerous, but because everyone around you will try to convince you that it's wrong. I also realized that the story doesn't end with court. The aftermath, the family fallout, the way people perceive you that can last far longer than any legal proceeding. But even so, standing by the truth felt better than any short-term approval could have felt. The relief was subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. I knew I could sleep without nightmares about perjury. I knew I hadn't compromised myself. And, strangely, I felt stronger. Because in the end, it's not about being liked, it's about being honest. And that's what I chose. The days after the court hearing were tense, to say the least. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages from relatives, friends, even coworkers asking in hushed tones if I was okay or if everything had worked out. But I could feel the underlying judgment in every word. My family had already made up their minds. I was the villain. I had refused to be a pawn in Mark's little game, and that made me, in their eyes, heartless. Mark, predictably, didn't come around. He acted like the world had betrayed him. I tried a few times to talk, but he either ignored me or offered passive-aggressive comments that made me question why I even cared. And you know what? I started to see a pattern. This wasn't about the court case. It never really had been. This was about control, about getting people to do what he wanted, about shaping reality to fit his version of himself. And the moment I refused, I became a target. Even so, life moves on. Work was the one place I felt grounded. I couldn't control my family, I couldn't control Mark, but I could control my own actions. I could show up, do my job, and keep my integrity intact. And every time I got frustrated or guilt-tripped by my family, I reminded myself, truth matters more than approval. And perjury, that would have haunted me for life. Eventually, the court made its ruling. As I suspected, Mark lost the case. Not spectacularly, but definitively. The landlord presented his documentation, timestamps, and photos, and without a witness to support his claims, Mark's story fell apart. Financially, he was hit with fines and some minor restitution. Emotionally, he was devastated, though not for reasons of self-reflection, more because reality had finally refused to bend for him. When I heard the verdict, I felt conflicted. Relief, obviously, but also sorrow. Sorrow that my family had turned against me so quickly. Sorrow that my brother couldn't see the damage he caused. And sorrow that the people I loved most had prioritized loyalty over honesty. And then something interesting happened. A few weeks later, my sister-in-law, Sarah, reached out. She told me she had spent time thinking about the situation and realized something important. She couldn't defend the lies, and deep down, she respected that I had stayed truthful. She admitted she had tried to stay neutral, but in the end, my honesty had made her see the difference between moral courage and blind loyalty. Her message was simple. Thank you for doing the right thing, even when it hurt. It was the first genuine acknowledgement I had received in a long time, and it made me realize that sometimes, even when the immediate aftermath is brutal, there are people who notice, people who understand, even if quietly. My parents, they were harder to reach. Mom called occasionally, but the guilt-laden tone was still there. Dad, in particular, struggled. He didn't understand why I wouldn't just help family. For him, family meant unflinching support, no questions asked. But over time, even their calls softened. Not fully, not immediately. But slowly, they started recognizing that my refusal to lie wasn't a betrayal. It was responsibility. And responsibility, as they eventually admitted, sometimes feels like defiance when you've never had to see it in action before. Mark, of course, remained angry. The resentment lingered. He didn't forgive me, and honestly, I don't know if he ever will. But that's okay. Forgiveness isn't my responsibility. My responsibility is to be honest, to maintain my integrity, and to live with the consequences of my choices, good or bad. Reflecting on everything, here's what I've learned. Doing the right thing is rarely easy, especially when it conflicts with family expectations. Standing up for honesty in the face of immense pressure is exhausting, terrifying, and lonely, but it's necessary. Every lie, no matter how small it seems, erodes trust and self-respect. Family loyalty isn't unconditional obedience. Loyalty is complicated. It's about support, empathy, and shared responsibility, not blind complicity. My family initially confused loyalty with obedience, and that caused a lot of unnecessary pain. Charisma doesn't equal truth. Mark's charm allowed him to manipulate situations and perceptions for a long time. But charisma can't change facts. It can't replace accountability. And eventually, facts have a way of asserting themselves, whether people like it or not. Reputation is everything. One lie could have cost me my career, my credibility, and the way people see me professionally and personally. Even when family pressure is immense, some lines shouldn't be crossed. Integrity pays off in unexpected ways. Yes, the immediate aftermath was brutal. Yes, my family judged me harshly. But staying truthful created long-term peace and self-respect that no temporary approval could have given me. And here's the kicker. The story doesn't always end with closure. Some relationships may remain strained forever. Some people may never understand. But your choices define you more than their opinions ever will. I'm not writing this to glorify myself or say I'm some hero. I'm writing this because so many people get caught in situations like this, where lying seems easier, where family expects blind loyalty, where pressure feels unbearable. And I want anyone watching or reading this to know that saying no, standing by the truth, and protecting your integrity is never heartless. It's human. If I could go back, would I do anything differently? Honestly, no. The emotional fallout was painful, and yes, I lost some trust and respect from people I hoped would understand. But I also preserved my conscience. I didn't compromise myself, and that's worth more than temporary approval. Mark will continue his life, likely finding other ways to manipulate or charm his way through situations. My family will continue to process the events in their own way, and I will continue mine, living honestly, keeping my boundaries, and recognizing that integrity sometimes costs relationships, but never betrays the self. The truth is powerful, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's unpopular, and even when it makes you feel completely alone. I learned that the hard way, and I'm sharing it now so that maybe someone else doesn't have to pay the same price, or if they do, at least they know they're not alone. So here's the bottom line. Being honest when the world wants you to lie isn't heartless. It's courageous, it's necessary, and it's the only way to live without looking in the mirror and seeing someone you don't recognize. If you ever find yourself in a similar position where the pressure to compromise your integrity is intense, remember, the easiest path isn't always the right one. Sometimes standing alone is exactly where you're supposed to be, and sometimes saying no is the most heroic thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my story. It's messy, it's emotional, and yes, it's painful, but it's also real. And maybe, if nothing else, it can help someone else see that truth, inconvenient, messy, painful truth, is worth defending, no matter the cost.